Hi, it's Crafty here, your trusted source for economic analysis and trash talking. Let's talk about the UK pound, the once mighty pound sterling, the world's oldest currency still in use, the piece of paper that could be converted to a pound of silver in the days of yore, the quid, the sov, the dosh used across the British Isles and at one time throughout its mighty empire. Now the so-called experts are reaching for the adult diapers over the apparent collapse of the pound. If you believe the media, British tourists heading for Mallorca are furiously pawning their empty crisp packets for extra cash to pay for their holiday. Children no longer sing in the streets. Pensioners are eating their pets because of the current economic calamity. Life as we know it is over for the Brits. But there is no need to wet the bed over the pound. The UK is going to be fine precisely because it has a floating currency and can control its own destiny. The same problem exists for those using the euro in Europe. The euro is also in the toilet. They are in a very similar situation to the UK, but individual governments don't have the same options available to them as exist in the UK. The problem is the surging US dollar caused by jitters over the war in Ukraine. The greenback has always been a safe haven in times of trouble. As a result, the US dollar is on a 20-year high against the world's 6 major currencies. Nearly every currency is depressed against the US dollar. The value of Japan's currency has halved against the US dollar over the last decade. That is one of the reasons why Japanese-made cars are still sold in the West. The Australian dollar has almost halved over the same period, and no panic has broken out there. The Canadian dollar has followed a largely similar trajectory as the Australian dollar over the past decade. If you want to look at a currency problem, take a look at Turkey, Brazil, and Mexico. The Turkish lira is worth about 5% of its value in 2008. Turkey is totally screwed at the moment, but it has strong fundamentals that could turn things around if the politicians stop behaving irrationally. The Brazilian currency was worth 3 times more just a decade ago. Geez. That would hurt if you are a Brazilian trying to send your kid to a university in the United States. It would be particularly bad if you were a poor Brazilian who needed to buy expensive foreign medicine for a sick family member. That would cause a world of pain. The Mexican peso would buy you 2.5 times the number of greenbacks you'd get just 14 years ago. Those guys are up the creek without a paddle, and Mexico really depends on its trade with the US. It isn't a minor problem for them and one that looks like it won't be overcome in the medium term. These 3 countries have long-term financial problems. Their economies are basket cases, and as a result their populations are suffering. The UK does not have problems anywhere near this magnitude. So if we accept for a minute that the UK is not about to suffer a Zimbabwe-style collapse, we really need to look over the Atlantic to see the impact of a high dollar on US competitiveness. Let me explain. This is more a confidence and perception issue than a real crisis. Still, if left unchecked, the decline would probably get even worse and allow the bedwetters and speculators to cause further damage. The Bank of England was in the markets on Wednesday the 28th of September to prop up the economy by buying UK government debt, lowering borrowing costs for the UK government and signaling that the government won't sit on its hands. This followed a rapid decline in the value of the pound in the previous few days and a warning from the International Monetary Fund that the UK government should scrap plans for a large tax cut aimed at the rich. The impact on the US of the strong dollar is mixed. A strong dollar helps hold down domestic inflation by lowering the cost of imported goods. Every dollar buys more goods and services as it rises. Since the US is a large net importer, a 20% rise in the dollar can have a measurable impact on inflation. A study by the Federal Reserve Bank of Cleveland estimated that a 1% rise in the dollar typically lowers non-petroleum import prices by 0.3% cumulatively over 6 months. A proportion of that drop passes through to lower overall inflation, so it's no surprise that there has been little pushback from the Treasury or the Fed about the dollar's recent sharp appreciation. As we will see in a moment, this is a short-sighted approach by our political masters. Sure, inflation is a problem in the US right now, but the double-edged sword of a high greenback definitely cuts both ways. But the high dollar also impacts the competitiveness of US exports. Let's assume you are an international airline and you are considering 2 choices of equally matched products in the long-range wide-body airliner market. You only really have 2 choices: the Airbus 350 that probably costs the same amount in your local currency, or the Boeing 787 that is now 15 to 20% more expensive. So in the longer term, there will be a negative impact on the competitiveness of US exports if the dollar stays high. It will impact the tourism sector. It will cause those families in places like Brazil to think about a less expensive way of educating their kids. For example, the low pound has made Oxford a far more affordable option than Harvard. Canada and Australia are also now more affordable than the US as a destination for students. Another more readily relatable example might be to ask who would want to buy a Ford Mustang at the moment. They have gone up in price by around 20% this year in most markets. So if the dollar stays high for long, the result is a significant kick in the guts for the US economy. And remember, what goes down will eventually go back up again. There are signs that the UK's intervention is already beginning to stabilize the pound, though more will need to be done in coming days and weeks. It will be interesting to watch the talking heads blaming the new British government for this dilemma or blaming the old one for Brexit. None of those assholes will mention that if the UK didn't have the pound, there would be far fewer ways of controlling financial markets and interest rates. The whole story is a massive overreaction to the current situation, and there is a possibility of the pound and the euro falling even further. But I'm confident that the long-term prospects for the UK are very positive, and in a few years the Brits will be whining about a strong pound adversely impacting the competitiveness of their exports. After all, bitching and moaning is what those shower-dodging Brits do best.